Thank you, Amy, thank you. All of which set me up really nicely for great embarrassment if this presentation bombs. But so like Amy said, I speak professionally. I do marketing storytelling. I mean, I've worked in digital marketing, not just in the nonprofit sector, but also in for-profit for the last almost 6 to 10 years now. And all of that, coupled with the fact that I grew up in a time when social media was very much blooming into some might call it a weed, that it is today, has given me insight not just into how to tell an effective digital story, but how to implement digital strategy broadly at the organizational level. And that's really what we're going to be getting into today. How to tell a good story. And we're going to do that by exploring the power of stories, how stories can impact people and how they connect with people. Something that we all recognize in the not-for-profit space, but we're going to take a little bit of an almost scientific approach to the power of stories and how they connect with people. We're going to look at the importance of having what we can call an omni-channel customer journey, donor experience that takes into account not just digital, but also touch points like direct mail and other assets that you might put out into the world for your donor base. We're going to look at an example of a pure digital campaign that we ran at Blakely for Cancer Research Society. And then what we're going to do is take that larger scale campaign and winnow it down into something that can be done on a budget or something that can be done with limited resources. And that's kind of the map that we're going to go through for the conversation we're going to have today. But before we get there, one of the first things that I want to do is do a bit of a diagnosis of the challenges that not-for-profit organizations, or one specific challenge that not-for-profit organizations face when it comes to intentional storytelling. And I'm going to use that phrase quite frequently, intentional storytelling, because by merit of the fact that most, if not all of us, are fundraisers, we're people who talk about our cause, our beneficiaries, their journey, we're all storytellers of a kind. Intentional storytelling comes down to telling directed stories that are connected across every channel all the time and that can connect with your donors in the places that they want to be connected with, which nowadays includes the digital sphere. And that's what we're going to get into. The challenge, though, that I hear from a lot of not-for-profit organizations that, I'll be honest, I sometimes find a little difficult to believe, is that they struggle to find content. They struggle to find the right stories to put out there into the world, or stories at all, to put out there into the world to connect with their donors, or to allow their donors to connect empathetically with them as a brand and as an organization. But in my experience, not just working on a consulting level, but working within the nonprofit sphere as a fundraising marketer, that's something that I've always struggled to come to grips with. But I think part of the challenge is that when we're looking at stories, and when we're talking about stories and the application of storytelling in the not-for-profit space, the first thing that we need to do, and we're going to talk about how to do this in a more prescriptive fashion a little later on, is look beyond the immediate beneficiaries. Because that's the place that we start. Who is it that we serve? What living creature, be it animals, people, or nature itself, do we serve? And what challenges are they facing? And how do we tell that story to the world in a way that is going to connect with people and get them to take action? But one of the things I want to start off by talking about is the fact that the narrative that we construct, or that you construct as people within the not-for-profit sector, takes into account not just the beneficiaries themselves, but every other person who is connected to them, whether or not they're affiliated directly with your organization, and also including those who became affiliated with your organization through a story that is as simple as a job application, and then began to learn a little more about what your organization is and what it does. So when we're looking at storytelling, and this is purely to give us a base, we're looking at content collection not just from the standpoint of how do we find the right beneficiaries whose stories we can tell to the world, but how do we connect the stories of the donors, the volunteers, the staff, the individuals who come through the doors of your organization, and the beneficiaries. How do we find those stories, collect those stories, and then tell them in a connected fashion across all of our channels, whatever those channels happen to be? If we can accept, or at least buy into for the time being, that content and finding content isn't the big challenge that we face, we can look to the fact that the big challenge really is content distribution. Once we have content, once we have a story, that story needs to be collected, it needs to be transformed into a format that can connect with people, whether it's the written word in direct mail, video over social advertising, a little bit of text and a photo on Google search ads, or any of a number of other channels. We need to take that story and produce it. And we need to produce it recognizing that often we have limited resources, and that's what creates the challenge for buy-in. Really, from my perspective, nonprofit faces three major challenges when it comes to producing good content, or producing content generally across the board. The first, of course, is a cost barrier, because marketing by its very nature seems to be expensive, especially as social media platforms and Google search itself moves to more of a pay-to-play model where you have to give money in order to get things done. It can be a challenging thing to look at marketing as something that can functionally be done, especially if you're not rocking like a sick kids budget or a charity water budget, right? If you have a budget that is limited, if you have limited resources, then marketing can seem like kind of a daunting task, because how can we possibly produce such a high quality video when the average videographer for something like that, if they're not giving you their discount rate, can cost easily at or upwards of 10 grand a pop. Then of course there's the resources challenge, and the resources challenge take place on two levels. On one level, you have human resources, and the fact that, little known fact, hello, okay, begin. I felt like the TTC there for a second, cutting out randomly in the middle of important statements. Little known fact, many nonprofits have limited human resources. They have a lot of tight timelines and relatively small staffs who wear many hats simultaneously. Surprising, I know. Which means that learning a new skill, bringing something new on board like digital marketing, can seem inherently challenging. The resources challenge also happens when you look at resourcing in terms of how much marketing do we really need to produce in order to connect well with our audiences. There's a perception out there that one video isn't enough. You need to, once you produce one video and put it out into the world, okay, great. That video is done, it's over now, we need another one, which costs another 10 grand. One of the things that we're gonna talk about is what I call waterfall marketing, which is splitting out the assets that you create so that one single video or two videos can become many, many things that you can use across channel in the long term. One of the big benefits of the fact that attention span is so much smaller, allegedly, nowadays, is that once you put something out into the world, the next time you put it out like 4 months later, people aren't gonna be like, no, I saw that before. They're lazy, they don't have it together. We saw that video, no, they don't know what they're doing. The reality is they've probably forgot. Or you look at a new portion of it and say, wow, this was amazing. I've never heard the story before, even if they heard it in your previous campaign that was 6 months previous. And so we're gonna look at how we go about taking a piece of content and then distributing, or at least a few examples of what that could look like. The last barrier is, of course, a skill-based barrier, and that's a technical barrier. This is the only barrier that it's not super easy to overcome, because the reality is that, especially if you're gonna do production in-house, there is a bit of a learning curve. Luckily, there are also pretty easy plug-and-play tools that'll help get you there. And I mean, this isn't necessarily, when you're looking at the technical barrier, about trying to bring on like volunteers or unpaid interns or somebody else to do your stuff. The people who know the story of your organization best is probably you. It's about finding efficiencies and ways to bring digital marketing into the fold as much as possible so that it's a task that's spread out over as many people as possible, rather than distributed to just one person who has this new piece of their portfolio on their plate. But the reality is that those challenges are difficult. And because of that, marketing, as it's been done in nonprofit, has historically been a little limited. It's been a little basic in that marketing in and of itself has been what we can consider to be a support tool for fundraising, which is a good thing. Like, marketing is meant to be a support tool for fundraising, because in the end, the goal of marketing, like everything else, is to collect more support for beneficiaries. The challenge, of course, is that marketing, when it is only seen as a support tool for fundraising, becomes quite limited and quite prescriptive. It's reactive. There's an event that's happening and we need some sort of social, whatever that happens to look like. Oh my goodness, this campaign isn't doing well enough. Maybe if we send out a tweet, that'll solve everything. Recognizing donors online. Oh my goodness, this donor seems to be lapsing a little. Maybe if we tag them in an Instagram post, everything will be better and they'll love us again. Right? That sort of reactive marketing can be functional occasionally, but in the long term, you're really not optimizing what marketing can do. So, along with looking at our storytelling method as stories by everyone and from everyone within our organization coming together to tell a cohesive story, when we're looking at marketing, we want to look at our other opportunities to use marketing well. So as I refer to marketing or intentional storytelling broadly, we're going to be looking at it from a few perspectives. We're going to be looking at it as donor acquisition and cultivation. And this isn't just about a directed campaign that pairs with whatever the latest DM you're sending out happens to be, or acquisition mailing. This is about those donors that you might not even know are out there, or who haven't connected with you yet, or aren't in your data, or who haven't opted into communication. Digital media, and particularly social media, is great because it allows people to kind of winnow the information that they have in the world down into an echo chamber of their liking, which can also be bad, but in this case it's good because we're talking about an echo chamber of good things that they care about. So in this case, because you're able to put out content into the world, you can connect with more people of like mind who would be interested in whatever it is your organization does. By the way, I recognize that I'm speaking quickly and going through this quickly, but that's largely just to make sure we stay relatively on track time-wise. Always available to answer questions at the end, or during. Feel free to raise a hand. So, community engagement. Every organization has a community of supporters that exist around them. Every nonprofit organization has people who care about their mission, their cause, their journey, the things that they do. The important part about that community is that oftentimes they want to be engaged beyond the scope of whatever their latest donation happens to be. Taking advantage of community engagement tools, an easy example being Facebook groups or LinkedIn groups set up and moderated by a nonprofit, but bringing together people of like mind and like interest leads to things like innovations in terms of what people can create and produce beyond the scope of what you've prescribed as your natural donor events. This is also very useful when you're running like peer-to-peer based fundraising engagements or events where people can connect with people that they care about who might have a similar mindset and therefore potentially create something out of it. There's also the general branding and profile building, and this is all about making the transition from a person hearing about who you are and who your brand is to making a donation or making a dedication of support of some kind easier. I like to think of this as the Crest toothpaste example. If we're in a pinch, we've forgotten toothpaste, and we just go to whatever Shoppers is out there or whatever drugstore is out there, and we see Crest toothpaste, most people can feel fairly confident in the decision they're making to buy Crest toothpaste because of the marketing Crest has done and because it's a recognizable name. In an ideal world, as your marketing grows and as your brand grows, it becomes more like Crest toothpaste. So people need less touch points in order to take action. And active, dedicated outreach helps make that happen. It's stewardship. One of the things that I've been exploring recently and that I find very interesting is the additional social value of direct mail packages or stewardship packages that we send out into the world. And part of that is that the content that we put out there isn't just important because it connects with people and gives them the prestige of receipt. It also gives them prestige in terms of shareability. The thing is that marketing is important in terms of stewardship because it gives people new ways to get recognition, prestige, if that's what they want. One of the things that I've seen organizations begin kind of writing into their recognition packages are shout-outs on social and the way to connect with people in a public forum so that more people can see them more often and they can show their network in a very different third-party fashion that they are connected with this brand or with this nonprofit in some way. But throughout all of these things, we're telling a story. We're telling a story that connects with donors through appreciation. We're telling a story that gives our community new ways to engage with us. We're telling our story in that we're giving people more insight into who we are, who you are, and generating trust. We are telling a story that people who might not even have heard of your not-for-profit, particularly if it's a smaller not-for-profit, we're giving them a story that they can connect with and empathize with. Because stories, at the end of the day, are super important. The way that we tell a story is how we very easily connect the mind of ourselves to our donors, allowing us to connect with them more easily, more frequently, and get buy-in and trust more quickly. One of the things that I like to cite for this is Yuri Hassan, the neuroscientist, his 2016 TED Talk, in which he ran a study showcasing how the brainwaves of the storyteller and the brainwaves of the listener actually synchronize when one hears a story from another. To quote, "To our surprise, we saw that all of these complex patterns within the listeners actually came from the speaker's brain." All of this to say that stories have been proven by quote-unquote science to actually connect far more effectively than virtually any other kind of communication with a person. And that's primarily verbally, but that also translates to the way in which we tell stories on paper, over digital media, through text, and through audio. What does this mean? It means do it for the story. At the end of the day, storytelling needs to go on directed, specific campaigns that we take and put out into the world on whatever our direct mail schedule happens to be. Doing it for the story means moving beyond the physical things that we put out into the world and giving people a story that they can tap into online, whether it be on Instagram, Facebook, Facebook Live, YouTube, or any of another number of channels that allow them to connect more deeply with your brand. The story that people want to hear is a story that is continuous, not something that is done in a short set or 1 or 2 chapters. So what's changed? And this is what we come down to here. Because currently, the way many not-for-profits tell their stories is as what we consider to be kind of an anthology. You have a number of packages that are sent out to a different donor base or a series of donor bases throughout the year that connect with those people telling different stories. Those stories follow a similar theme, but they're not always talking about the same thing, and they're not always talking about the same people. People can relate it back to a central cause, but not necessarily to a broad, overarching story that they're hearing about who your brand is and what they do. The theme is there, but the story is different. But that's no longer how people consume content on a regular basis. When you look at for-profit marketing, you see that more and more for-profit brands are trying to connect themselves to a cause in some way. And part of the reason for that is that when a for-profit brand puts out a new product or service, what they're looking to do is create a narrative around it. If you buy these shoes, you will run super fast and be a wicked athlete. If you get this tennis racket, you will be the next Serena Williams. If you go out there and get that new haircut, you'll be so much more attractive and your Tinder game will be amazing. If you buy this blazer, you will look way more professional on stage. I get sold on that one every single time, every single time. My guy Morris tells it to me, and I'm just like, yeah, no, 100%, yeah, no, take my money, it's fine. My point is that there's always a story. Every for-profit brand tells a story about the product or service that they hope that a customer base will buy into in order to connect more deeply with that person. Not-for-profit has an advantage because our stories inherently connect empathetically with the people who are not only in our community of supporters, but with people in general who may eventually become our community of supporters. And that's without artifice. Nonprofit is nonfiction. And that's something that is significantly to our advantage. But that still means that as for-profit brands have been talking about omni-channel marketing, everything is connected. A story you see in the paper will be the story that's seen on their website, will be a story that's seen in their latest tweet or series of tweets. We also, in the not-for-profit sector, need to start taking advantage of that. Right now, stories told by many, if not most, in the not-for-profit sector are kind of like True Detective. They're quite similar thematically from one to the other. You know generally what you're getting, but it's not always the same thing. It's not connected. It's different characters, it's a slightly different story. What we want, and where you want to be, is the Avengers. Because the thing is that, in all seriousness, right now, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the best metaphor for good content marketing out there. Because everything really is connected. If you take the central concept of Avengers and you go to any of the movies, Captain America, the original Iron Man, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel, then you can see immediately how every single one of these movies reference each other. You do have different characters, you do have slightly different stories, but they're all connected to one another and reference the pieces that came before them, no matter what channel they're on. Because you also have things like Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is arguably better than any of the movies. And you have Daredevil, which has tragically been canceled. But you have all of these things that are also on different channels, right? Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is still network television. Daredevil is Netflix. Different places where different people consume content in a way that is convenient to them, but every single one of those pieces through their story references back to the central arc of the Avengers. And I mean, you saw it. Anyone who's seen Endgame, no spoilers are coming for those who haven't, but anyone who's seen Endgame sees how many of those things get tied together in the end. How story arcs that you've heard way back when, more than 10 years ago, are suddenly coming together now. So that's something that we want to try and replicate with our marketing. This may be something that has been heard before, but it bears repeating. Because at the end of the day, this is still something that is a challenge. Designing a marketing web that actually connects all of the different channels, email, website, Twitter, YouTube, direct mail, of course, Instagram, LinkedIn, any podcast or other media system you have, not just to your brand and its central theme, but also all round to each other. Well, yeah, okay. Sure. All right. Well, all around to each other. Because that's the challenge that many, I think it's opening again. Hold up. Okay. We back? We're back. Okay. You are currently experiencing a delay southbound. Because that's the challenge. In the end, every piece of content that we're putting out there should be connected to every other piece of content that we're putting out into the world. It doesn't have to reference it directly every single time, but people should be able to take two pieces of your campaign, of your mid-level campaign from 2 different years and see the references from the latest to the previous. It should also have opportunities for people to connect on other channels. As I believe Penelope said earlier, there's a greater prestige that now comes with almost receiving pieces of paper, with receiving direct mail, because most people do things almost exclusively over digital. But that doesn't mean that those pieces of paper, that direct mail, should exist in isolation. I just suspect that slide is what's killing this presentation. Never tried to add a GIF to a PowerPoint before. But that's the thing, right? Although each of those things carry a greater degree of prestige nowadays, that doesn't mean it shouldn't be interconnected with the rest of your content. And that's content that's happening over digital. In a moment, we're gonna go through an actual digital campaign that was ran by Blakely with Cancer Research Society. And we're gonna talk a little bit about the demographics that work well in the digital sphere. Because one of the challenges that people face, or at least one of the points of contention, is that digital appeals to only a younger donor base and not to the older donor base that is used to getting traditional direct mail. And at least in what we found, though certainly not an exhaustive study, we didn't necessarily find that to be true. What we found supports the idea that the content consumption experience has changed. The way that people look at things and listen to things and take in information conveniently has changed from the past, where people would take dedicated time to read through an entire piece. I think one of the commonly quoted concepts or statistics or facts is that many people reading a letter of some kind will read the first paragraph and a half and then the last paragraph at the end of the page, or the last 2 paragraphs, and that's all they'll read, because people are busy. And it's difficult to take the time, the dedicated time, to consume content. And so people look for the most efficient way to get through it possible, while also accepting that they like the experience of having received the content at all. They receive the content and appreciate that, but they don't necessarily consume the content. Augmenting your traditional media with digital media gives you an opportunity to have them not just receive the content, but also actually consume the content. And that's through something that I consider to be passive intake of information. As people get busier, they want to consume content in the easiest fashion possible. That's why most of the views that people get on pretty much anything nowadays are over mobile, because people are constantly on the go. Most Facebook videos are actually watched without sound, because people are looking at it on the go. They want to continue to engage with the rest of the world. Maybe they're at work. Any of a number of reasons means that people are looking at the video, consuming pieces of it, and then moving on with their day without dedicating all of their senses simultaneously to consuming a piece of content. That's why good long-form articles might perform well, because people have enough buy-in already that they're going through it. That's why you might have longer views on landing pages, which we'll talk about soon, because landing pages, you already have a degree of opt-in before people get there into opting into the content experience that they're about to receive. But with general media, people don't listen to it for as long, or connect with it for as long, or connect with it as thoroughly. The easiest example of this is the case of podcasts. And I mean, I'm a little biased because I am a podcaster, so I've done a little bit more of a passionate exploration of this concept. But at the end of the day, an easy way to look at the impact of passive intake of information is looking at how people consume podcasts, which by their very nature allow for passive intake of information because they only engage one of your senses, and that's your hearing, allowing you to do other things at the same time. 22% of people listen to podcasts in the car, 11% at work, 4% on public transit, 4% working out, 3% walking around. The rest, there's a 7% that is other, but I'm just gonna loop them in with the rest of those top ones. The rest, because they're not at home. Because the other 49% listen to the podcasts at home, but I would posit, likely while doing other things. But even if you discount that 49% that are at home entirely and take the remaining percent and talk about where they listen to podcasts and actively consume content, whatever that content happens to be, educational or entertainment, they listen to it and consume it on the go while they're doing other things because it's super convenient. It's why audiobooks are growing in popularity constantly. Like, they're super popular already and even growing more so. Because audiobooks is content you can consume without sitting down and going through a novel. The beauty of digital is that digital by its very nature allows you to tap into passive intake of information through media like podcasts or like video. So when we're talking about storytelling and preparing stories for a digital first community of supporters, we need to look not just at where are our stories and what are the stories we're going to tell, but how can we tell them, frankly, in the most efficient way possible, using the least amount of attention of the audience that we have at hand. Yes, your audience is dedicated, but particularly if you're doing an acquisition of some kind where you're tapping into new people, people want the convenience of having content when they want it, how they want it, where they want it, and over the medium that they want it on. And I mean, hey, that's research at that point to know exactly what medium that is. But an easy place to start is giving people content the most efficient way possible. And the most efficient way to consume content right now is over digital, supplemented with higher level or higher value packages. Does that make sense? So, what I want to do is, as opposed to the norm of presenting a successful campaign at the end of a presentation, I actually want to talk a little bit about this campaign, very briefly, in the middle of the presentation. And the reason for that is that this campaign, of course, was a paid campaign done between Cancer Research Society and Blakely. So it was a paid campaign, and it was more expensive than the budget-based marketing that we're going to be talking about. But this serves as a pretty good model for something that can be implemented a little more easily and a little less of a costly fashion, if that makes sense. So, the campaign. This campaign ran from November 19th to December 31st of last year. This was CRS's 2018 year-end campaign, and this one was pure digital. It had 3 phases, 7 emails, 3 in phase 1, 1 in phase 2, 3 in phase 3. Full disclosure as we go into this, I personally did not run this campaign, but this campaign is the best representation of the concept of digital storytelling done in a connected fashion and done effectively. It involved Facebook advertising, Google search ads, Google display ads, and 3 landing pages. In terms of the active content that we were using to make this happen, we used a combination of written stories, images, and also a couple of videos, which is also why I wanted to talk about this campaign, because it takes into account a number of different iterations of media that one could use in this process. So I want to talk about landing pages for a sec, and then I want to talk about Facebook and email, and the combination of Facebook and email. Landing pages are, in my opinion, one of the single most useful tools that any digital marketer can have in their arsenal, right? A lot of people try to send people to their website from or a donation page or a donation form from a digital ad or an email that they put out into the world. The problem with your website is that the website has a whole bunch, or at least it should, have a whole bunch of other things on it. It's distracting by its very nature. And so people tend to explore. There's that old statistic that says you lose 50% of the people who go to a thing every time they click on something else. If we combine that idea with the fact that people have a lower attention span, the odds of a person going to your general website on a please donate page and then not going to anything else on that website are pretty low. And then they're not necessarily likely to come back to that page after exploring the rest of your website. What you want to do is kind of narrow the field and bring them towards a certain point. That's part of the reason landing pages are useful. The other reason landing pages are useful on a storytelling level is that landing pages are a massive opportunity for dedicated storytelling, because you are 1 degree closer to understanding what your donor is into. Sure, there are some people who click on a donate now button or something like that because they just want to see what's next. But I would posit that even those people who click on a button to go to the next page are opting into deeper storytelling. They have expressed through hitting that button, through going to that page, that they want more. And so any landing page that just has a form on it could potentially disappoint the donor, but at the very least, there's a big opportunity cost there because you have people opting into deeper storytelling. I love these landing pages because they do a combination of telling a teaser story in both cases, one regarding research on your left and one regarding a personal story of an individual on your right. And then they also tell a story, they tell a more deep story about the donation aspect. In the case of Cancer Research Society, there is of course, a significant emphasis on research, so we tell a deeper research story, but we also have a video. So we're giving people a few options. If they want to take the time to read, they have that. If they want to just get a quick video and make a decision off of that, they have that too. In an ideal world, they do all of them, get super convinced, and they're really into it. I'm going to show you the videos in a sec, by the way, just so you get a sense of what the videos are. Both the videos are really good. They were, of course, more highly produced, or they were produced, but we are going to talk about how you can create something similar with basic tools that most of us actually carry on hand. So, Facebook and email as well, because that was a significant part of this campaign. On a Facebook and email level, we found that email paired with Facebook works best when email lists are uploaded to Facebook and used to create custom and lookalike audiences. So what does that mean functionally? All of us have a donor list of some kind with emails in it. Things like Facebook can take that list, upload it as an Excel form or in any other format, and Facebook can find those individuals and serve them ads, assuming that they've logged on with their email and shown their email in some way, can serve those people ads that supplement what you're doing with your email campaign. So if you're sending things out via email, you can also time Facebook ads to go out in and around the same time to the same people so that you get multiple touch points with that person throughout the course of your campaign. Lookalike audiences are, in my opinion, almost more interesting because in the case of a lookalike audience, it creates a new list of people who have demographics that are similar to the original list that you uploaded and targets those people with Facebook ads because those people are theoretically, because they match the like, interest, etc., age, gender demographics of the original list, however they listed themselves, theoretically those people are more likely to connect with your cause and take action and become a donor. In terms of results, what we found was on the days of and post-email blasts, digital donations over those forms, or digital donations in general, went up over the previous metrics anywhere from 150% to 400+%. So the multiple touch points with people who were receiving communications on multiple levels from the campaign meant that they were actually more likely to commit, give, donate, become a supporter over time. Does that make sense? Any questions on that front?
So, quick question, just regards to this particular campaign, was it was their annual campaign, was it an acquisition campaign?
I think it was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was an annual campaign.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it became an acquisition campaign through that lookalike audience.
Exactly. Yeah. So this campaign was interesting because it connected with a current donor base and a prospective donor base on multiple levels. Right? So it did a little column A, a little column B. Sense?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Cool. The other thing I want to point out when it comes to Facebook and Google audiences, Facebook and email campaigns, I should say, is the demographics question. Because again, one of the arguments against or potentially for social is that social, digital marketing, digital media is all oriented specifically towards a younger, quote-unquote, millennial generation of donors who are also simultaneously seen as sort of the holy grail of fundraising. Like if we can get millennials to give, then that'll be a new gold rush, a whole new world. I mean, I'm a bit skeptical of that because partially as a millennial and having, knowing a number of millennials, one consistent reality is that they have no money, but that's fine. Eventually they'll have money, and when that happens, they'll want to be connected with over the channels that connect with them. So that is digital media in part. But what's important about this little chart here is that what we found over the course of not just this campaign, but more generally running digital marketing campaigns and digital media acquisition and otherwise campaigns, is that it's the 55 to 64, and even the 65 plus range of prospective and current donors who then move to actually give and connect and support over digital platforms. I mean, those sets of donors, even though they aren't necessarily as used to the reality of digital marketing and digital media, are adaptable. Kind of like, I would allude it back to what Penelope said this morning, in that an older category of donors are inherently more loyal, at least I believe her findings in that. And so in this case, what appears to have happened is that that same demographic of donors are more than willing to shift gears or adapt, at least in part, to connect with an organization that they care deeply about, no matter what channel that happens to be. CRS has a pretty connected donor base, like they're very connected to the brand of CRS, so that definitely could be a contributing factor here because of the dedication and support of the donors that they have at hand. Make sense? Questions? Cool. So, let's look at the videos, because I want to talk about the creative assets soon. Yeah.
What did you say was the timeline on this?
November 19. Oh, do we not have sound? November 19 to December 31st.
So Christmas campaign.
Yeah, year end.
Yeah, okay.
Let me see if we have. Okay, that's fine. Just take a look at it visually, because in many ways that's what's actually more important in this case. So we don't need the full 30 seconds of silence. Oh, wait. Essentially, that first piece was an interview with a researcher named Dr. Boschemen, who had herself suffered breast cancer. And based upon her experience with breast cancer, it got her deeply interested in research as a potential solution for what breast cancer could become, or how breast cancer could be mitigated through research. This second story was with a mother whose family was torn apart by colon cancer after her husband, Chris, was diagnosed late in the game and eventually passed away 2 years later. We used both of these stories in tandem to tell this campaign because they touched on two different things that matter deeply to our audiences. On one hand, we have an Audience for Cancer Research Society that is very committed to the concept of research. What research is, the value of research, the opportunities that research have for cancer, and how research in cancer research societies kind of pitch, opinion, perspective is the solution that is going to help solve or at least mitigate the impact of cancer. We use both of these videos in tandem throughout the phases of these campaigns. But what's notable here is that neither of these videos are videos that you would see or hypothetically hear in completion. We didn't record 45 seconds of footage and then put that 45 seconds of footage together with a couple of photos, and that's the end of it. And this is touching on that waterfall marketing aspect. What we did instead was take a much longer recording of a conversation with both Sarah, the mother in that case, and Dr. Boschemen herself, and then use pieces of that video on multiple levels. So this concept where there is a limited amount of content out there, and that eventually you run out of content because you take a couple of stories, put them out into the world, and now, oh my goodness, we need new stories, is, to be honest, patently false. because every piece of content that we take in, if we get enough of it in that one interaction or in that one story, can be repurposed and remarketed across the board on a number of different levels. And in the case of this campaign, it was actually highly successful. During that period of time for year end, we raised nearly $150,000. Projections for what the campaign would be and could become were exceeded by 53%. And our media return, and that's including the consulting fee and the fee for organizations like Blakely and the production fee, ended up being $3 to 1. So gaining approximately $3 for every $1 spent on that campaign. All around, super successful campaign because people were connected to the stories of the individuals who were in it and the stories that were told, not just about research, but by people whose lives had been racked by cancer and the impact that cancer has. And so you have not just a dedicated donor base of individuals who are then willing to continue to give or hopefully upgrade their gifts based upon the stories that they're seeing, the personal touch points that connect empathetically with them, but you also have stories that can connect with other people externally on multiple levels. Now, of course, this was a paid campaign done in collaboration with an agency. Many organizations and many not-for-profit organizations can't necessarily do that. So what we want to do is look at parsing it down. How do we scale down this system in order to connect with people using video, using digital media, but without spending an excess of money in order to get things done? The first place we start is finding our content. And here's where we get right back to the beginning in terms of where is our content, where does it live, and how do we get the right content to speak to our audience, our donor base, whoever that happens to be. The first thing is, as discussed, content is everywhere. And that means that content goes beyond the scope of the individuals who are your beneficiaries, but go to every other person that your organization connects with. The second is, most great content can be collected with your phone. In my other life as an actual digital marketer who did the video production thing, a lot of what we would collect and collect well was images, videos, conversations with people at events while they were engaging with their organization. Naturally, of course, this requires a degree of opt-in, and as I'll talk about in a moment, changes slightly when your population is a vulnerable population. So it's not so easy to just whip out a phone, take a video, take a photo, and put it out in the world. That changes the game a little bit, and that's where collecting content, not just from your beneficiaries, but from all of the other stakeholders in their lives, becomes super important. But most great content can be collected with your phone. I'm going to use iPhone as an example because that's what I happen to use. With an iPhone, you can collect fairly high quality video. You can also collect as your base audio, fairly quality audio. The tools to make your audio better are also fairly inexpensive, depending on what it is that you want to do. But the important piece here is that for the average person consuming the content, they're not looking at your piece and being like, yeah, no, that wasn't 400K. No, I can't support that. I can't support that. Unfortunately, that was a little too shaky cam for me. I prefer steady cam. They clearly didn't use a tripod. This just doesn't work. This wasn't stylistically, artistically, this didn't connect with me. That's not the decision that's being made. When it comes to producing content, whether it's photographic content, or video content, or audio content, quality of content trumps quality of production. If the photo you've taken is blurry because the kids were jumping around and having a great time, that's awesome. People get that. People aren't going to look at it and think, that didn't meet the standards of what I expect from an influencer on Instagram. That's not what the connection is. The connection is one of empathy. It's one of seeing visually where their dollars are theoretically, or where at least they associate their dollars with going. I had a question earlier today about this very idea, right? Like, how do we attribute impact when we're telling stories and doing marketing on a statistical level or otherwise? But the thing is that impact is felt as much as read. In fact, in my opinion, and I think this is backed by study, it's felt more than read, which means that when people see your beneficiaries doing well, when they even see challenges that are faced, with a discussion on what it is that you're doing, that is as impactful, if not more in some cases, than a detailed report. Quality of content trumps quality of production. So if the only way that you can do content, I mean, I say the only way, but this is actually a great way to do content, is to arm the people who are dealing with beneficiaries, volunteers, other supporters, with a phone and empower them, with the required opt-ins of course, to collect content for you, what they're seeing on the ground, and then either, depending on who your population is, run it through some sort of a vetting system, or have a couple of people who are empowered to make the decision themselves to post it to a social channel or to put it into a pool to be used later. That's how you normalize the collection of content and make it really easy. The misconception is that you need this one person who's your videographer, photographer, and media person who you have to bring on externally, whether they're like a new grad or there's somebody that you found or they're an agency or anything else to do the work for you. If you have the resources to do that, that's awesome. But if you don't have the resources to do that, then this is something that can be distributed across the organization to anyone who actually interacts with your beneficiaries, excepting of course for the need for privacy, opt-in, and vulnerable population. The best, and this ties back in, the best photos that you can take are the candid photos. We all want, because I used to work for a nonprofit that dealt with children, so I'm gonna keep using children as an example, right? We all want that perfectly styled photo that shows the perfect laugh, the perfect head flick back, the droplets of water in the air, if they're on the lake or something like that. We all want that pure joy photo. But that stock image style isn't really something that always naturally exists in the world. But people connect to what is real to them, what is authentic to them. And authentic content lies in collecting it when people, your beneficiaries, your volunteers, whoever those people happen to be, are actually experiencing the joy or the feeling or the emotion that you want to express outwards. Whenever I produce videos in the part of my career that is producing videos, we tend to do those conversations in an unscripted fashion. We don't give across 10 questions before. Even when I podcast, I don't give out questions before. We sit and we have a conversation. The thing is that when it comes to producing video, especially if you're producing it in-house, you have an opportunity to have real dedicated conversations with individuals and then pick and choose the pieces of that you want to put out into the world. Again, misconception is you have to bring in a big crew, do some scripting, and then you'll have this highly produced video at the end of it. When a video that is produced on your phone with your arms held sort of stiff and then having a real conversation with people is just as, if not more, impactful. In a video campaign that I ran previously, one of the things that I ended up doing because we just didn't have resources on set is I would take my phone and just hold it up in front of my eyes and do a walkthrough, looking through my phone through the entire environment of the event that we were hosting. And then what that ended up giving us was wicked point of view camera footage, so that when it was produced in something like, in my case, Adobe Premiere, we had this perspective of someone who was of the person, being the person behind the screen, walking through this experience with kids having fun all around them, right? Your phone is a magical tool at the moment. What you need to do, where possible, is empower people to use that device that is already on them to start collecting pieces of content. And this doesn't require, just as a sidebar, this doesn't require a big digital strategy first. As much as I do the digital strategy thing, I would actually start with that. Figure out whatever you need to do privacy and legally, right? But then just start with that. Get people just collecting content right at the beginning with their phone. Empower the right people and get them to just do it. Because, where many organizations also fall apart is creating this hyper-planful system to start getting content. And then they're gonna have this launch day that's okay, and today we get content, right? But content isn't planful. Content happens, things are happening around you. Right? A volunteer comes in and then they make a casual mention of, I volunteered here for 4 or 5 years. I stopped for a while, but now I'm back and it's been great. And then your immediate question is, why? And that leads to a wicked conversation. That conversation should be recorded. Probably be hey, sorry, just 1 second. Can I record this? Is that okay? Right? And then record them saying yes, obviously. But then take that content, and that's content for you, right? Those are things that you can use in the moment. Every nonprofit person experiences a ton of those events on a regular basis that are never recorded, are referred to fondly in future, but they're never really circled back on. If we empower people to collect content themselves, that allows us to distribute that task across the entire organization. Many of whom are having experiences that none of us know about. So when it comes to finding your stories, and this is the piece that I wanted to show you, and I will send out the slides that aren't pictures of Avengers afterwards. This is what I call your orbits of relevance. These are some of the stakeholders that are involved within your organization who are opportunities for dedicated storytelling. Of course, centrally you have your primary population, and sometimes you can't show that population, but we'll get to that. Centrally you have your primary population. Every other person in these orbits is someone or a group of people who have a stake in the outcome of that person's life, or that animal's life, or that tree's life. Whatever it happens to be, these are people who have a stake based upon something that they're doing. We're going to use people, human beneficiaries in this case, because it's a little easier. So you have your primary population being the individuals that you're serving. Extended from that, you have family, extended family, friends, caregivers, even donors who may have some association with a real person or who may have had an association with a real person who exists or existed within your organization. External to that, you of course have staff and volunteers. Now this isn't a hard and fast list. I mean, there are some very deep connections made between volunteers and beneficiaries and externally throughout any of these. But at the end of the day, this is a good metric to start with in terms of discovering where you're gonna find your stories. Depending on who you are, which of these things apply? Then who can you reach out to in terms of dedicated storytelling? Or what events do you have coming up that naturally gather these people around, and how can you connect with them? But one of the questions that always comes up when we talk about storytelling is what to do about vulnerable populations. Because vulnerable populations are difficult to profile, and for very good reason. This is the conversation that actually started when I was sitting down with a friend of mine who was doing general comms for a women's shelter in Toronto. And one of the things that she talked about was that she was struggling with developing stories because naturally, for safety reasons and privacy reasons, you could not show the individuals who were the beneficiaries of their care. And that's a challenge. What you do in that case is what I've always considered marketing your negative space. So if you can't show the precise individual who is the beneficiary of your organization, the key is taking something like this and filling in all of the spaces around them. Everything here starts with finding your best stories, because your best stories are not always the ones that focus on the beneficiaries themselves. And I recognize that Penelope said this morning that people don't respond to donor stories, so use those sparingly then. I believe her results. But that still leaves family where possible, friends where possible, even if those people are talking generally about an individual who they interacted with in the past. It leaves your staff, it leaves volunteers. In the case of the women's shelter, they employed a number of counselors who would come on and talk to people who had suffered abuse of some kind. And so those counselors are a phenomenal resource. And I say that accepting that it's also a very tragic necessity. But in terms of marketing, they're a phenomenal resource because they can talk in an anonymized fashion about the work that they do in association with your organization. There's no need to identify an individual, but they can talk about work done. And if you collect enough of those people, it paints a general picture of the population that you serve through the eyes of what you can consider the eyes of witness. The eyes of witness are super powerful because they're people who have firsthand experience with a certain population generally, who can talk about experiences that they've seen without actually identifying those individuals. So when it comes to vulnerable populations, specifically where you cannot show that population at all, what you want to do is show all of the amazing people who surround them. That's why it comes back to those orbits of relevance, because once you've mapped that out, this is really the only planful part of the content collection I would do before starting it, right? Once you've mapped out who the people are that you care about collecting content from, then it becomes pretty easy to just start doing it. Because once you're at that point, now you know when to be on your game to figure out what stories you need and how to collect them. And every piece of marketing that you do can be more than just that single piece of marketing. Like I said, when it came to Cancer Research Society's content, we didn't just record 45 seconds of video and say, okay, that's a wrap, we're done now. And this is also, by the way, why unscripted is amazing when it comes to having these conversations, because you get insights that you never expected to. I've produced videos that are wholly scripted, and those often are actually one-off. Like, you do it once, that's it. The video's done. You don't often get little sound bites that you can use elsewhere, or other pieces of writing that are transcribed that can be used elsewhere. It's when you distribute it out and get a longer form piece of content, whether it's through a written interview or really any other system, that allows you to do what I'm about to talk about. So remarketing your content is what we can consider to be the content waterfall. The example I'll use is a 10-minute interview. So we sit down with someone, we have a conversation with them. Let's say it's a volunteer, and we talked about their history of volunteerism, why they volunteered, and what brought them to organization X in the first place. 10 minutes is really long to put into an email or digital media. Again, remember, we're going back to connecting with people with content in the most efficient way possible, giving them an easy way to access information. So you have this 10 minutes of video. That 10 minutes of video starts with a behind-the-scenes selfie. I do this every time I podcast, anything I collect, we take a quick selfie and we post it to Instagram. Say, great chatting with Jane, the volunteer. It was amazing, amazing insights from someone who's been so dedicated to our organization for the past 20 years. We'll be airing an interview with Jane very soon where she talks about why she volunteered for us in the first place. We are so excited for it. Thank you, Jane, and we hope you all will check it out soon. And that's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, right? That's all it is. It's not attributed to any specific revenue that you're going to generate off of this. It's just making people aware that something's coming, that they're connected to something, that there's a story, another chapter of the organizational story that they have yet to hear that they're going to hear. It can be articles and blog posts, transcribed or otherwise. It can be a set of 5-minute videos, because longer videos actually do okay when they're uploaded natively to Facebook or LinkedIn. It can be a 1-minute Instagram short or a longer Instagram story, longer series of Instagram stories, or on IGTV if you're into that. It can be a podcast episode if you rip the audio from it and put that into podcast form and put that out on SoundCloud or something else, taking real advantage of passive intake of information. It can be any of a number of these things, but we need the content to get that done. So when you're starting, it's about finding the right people whose stories you want to collect, then empowering your organization to collect those stories without having one dedicated person that needs to prescribe what story is taken when. Then you need to take it to a level where those people or those long-form pieces of content can be parsed out into pieces of content that can be used in a variety of different places on a variety of different levels. And I mean, it hasn't been included up there, but fractions of that story that you collected, that could be in whatever mid-level package you're sending out soon. Maybe this is a really well-known volunteer who a lot of people and parents or siblings or whatever have seen around, right? Maybe a fraction of that, and that behind-the-scenes selfie. Maybe that could feature in your newsletter. This has application in terms of content collected that can be translated to direct mail as well as digital. So, at the end of the day, what are we doing? What can we do at its core in order to help us become a little more connected to digital marketing and employ storytelling for a digital-first community of supporters? The first step is get serious about social. And I know, we're bored to death with hearing about why social media is important, but here's my take on why it's important. Step away from connecting with people where they are when they want it. Step away from it looks kind of weird if you don't have Twitter and it's a hit to the credibility and people Google you, and if they see that you're not on social, it reduces trust nowadays. Step away from the fact that any marketing consultant out there is going to say, oh my God, you're not on social media? How are you connecting with your audience? There's a whole new mine of donors that you haven't connected with that only connect on social. The reason you want to get on social consistently isn't even just so that you can tell a connected story. It's because it's really low threshold and super easy to do, and it's free. It's free marketing. Social media means that everybody has a marketing budget that they can do because that budget is zero. Anyone with a phone and with Twitter or Instagram or Facebook on it can post to a page. You need your systems internally to check and balance what gets posted, but at the end of the day, people connect with things they like on social. They make lists, they make groups, they connect and create an echo chamber of things that they care about. If there are people out there, which there clearly are, who care about whatever your cause happens to be, they have an echo chamber of content that exists out there where they're listening to things and connecting with things. You want to be part of that, and social media is a really, really low threshold way to do this. That doesn't necessarily involve a whole ton of investment or even a whole bunch of time. The second step, which we talked about already, is normalize the collection of content. So we carry a quality camera around in our pocket, use it. Distribute the opportunity to collect content out to as many people of your organization or within your organization as you feel comfortable with. Give them guidelines on what to do when they're collecting content, but give them the opportunity to collect the content themselves. put it into a general pool. The way I do it when I'm running something like this is I'll create a Google Drive bucket that is just for content to be uploaded. And then get anyone who's collecting content, it all goes there, and then where the funnel narrows is when you do vetting and quality control for what goes out. But at the very beginning, like, quality control means nothing if you have like 2 photos, because then, I guess quality control is, do I choose photo A or photo B, right? What you want is a massive pool of content that you can then go through and determine the right pieces at the right time to use in the right places. The third is write your big story, right? So this is where we get back to storytelling on an overarching level. So again, Avengers, right? Avengers has a massive story that it's been telling in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for the last 10 years. In and amongst those stories are stories of Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel, Black Panther, Black Widow is still coming, right? There's a ton of stories in between, but they all contribute to the big story, the big overarching theme or idea or story that you're telling. And that big story could end after a year, right? But you want a big story that everything can connect back to in some way. In this case, think of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, right? Lord of the Rings trilogy is massive. They go on this big journey in it, right? But the Fellowship of the Ring is relatively small. There are only a few plot movements. So start by writing, and this is where it gets planful, right? But you can do it even now for the rest of the year. You just have to retroactively connect it back to things that you've done so far where possible, right? Write your big story for what you want people to think, feel, and experience at every donor level, going from ideally the beginning of whatever the calendar year is for your organization to the end. And then as you're going through and choosing your individual acquisition, renewal, or otherwise mailings and digital packages, then you're tying it back to that story. So write the big story first, and then see where your seasonal stories fit into that big overarching story, so that people feel constantly connected with and are getting a consistent narrative. And then write that in on a micro level through any social media or digital media work you happen to be doing. The last step is to actually produce the content. Photos in and of themselves are free. Just use your phone. If you want cool edits, I use Snapseed to edit a lot of my photos. That was recommended to me. It works pretty well. But at the end of the day, photos are free. Photos are a super easy thing that we can use. It's really low threshold to connect. We just have to empower the right people, or people in general within our organization, to collect them. Video editing can be free with things like iMovie or Windows Movie Maker. iMovie it's okay. It's a pretty easy plug and play way to produce a video. When you get further along, if you're finding it useful, and better yet, if you manage to make video production like revenue generating as a tool with your organization, it's a better idea to invest in more expensive tools like the Adobe Suite or Premiere. But at the beginning, even your phone can really just do it in a pinch if you need to. Again, quality of content trumps quality of production. So don't worry about this as much, but if you care about it, it's actually pretty easy to do, and I'm happy to talk resources with anyone who wants to get into the tactics of how to actually do it. Because I've done video production or facilitated video production with crews on an individual level with the Adobe Suite, and very, very independently, where I had no money whatsoever to distribute, or very little money to distribute to doing things like this. But if you have a budget, there are I'm gonna cite one tool that I would recommend if you have a little bit of money. And by a little bit of money, I mean about $99 plus tax. The Rode SmartLav Plus has been one of the single most important, and I don't work for Rode, but I find it very useful. It's one of the single most important, useful tools that I found as a media producer. It is a lav mic that produces high quality audio that is designed to plug into your phone. And with that, especially if you're just out there collecting stories, and if you're not ready to do video yet, which is totally fine, and you want to collect the audio that can then be transcribed into the written word for other pieces of content, this is how you empower people to just get those stories really quickly. Most of the podcasting that I do right now is with 2 Rode SmartLav Plus and a splitter, to allow me to just have conversations that generate an easy to use stream of audio that's just in your phone. It's just like a recorded piece of sound on your phone that you can send to any computer out there. But if I'm gonna give one product recommendation that is relatively cheap, it's that, because it comes back to taking the content that you have and producing it in a way that is easily accessible across multiple mediums. And my suggestion is the best place to do that is start with photos and then move to audio. You can move to video down the line, but audio makes it really easy to not just passively take in information, but passively collect information. At the end of the day, your community wants to hear from you. Your community cares about hearing from you. Even people who are dedicated to a cause generally want to hear from you. The question is, where do they hear from you? So if your community wants to hear from you, you need to tell your story where they're listening. And for a lot of people, where they're listening most frequently nowadays is online. They're listening via their email. They're listening via social media for sure. So if you can get good content out there, even if it doesn't lead to an immediate gift or an immediate expression of support, every single story you're putting out there is generating trust. It's connecting more deeply with a community that is looking for content from you. And with that, you're able to connect with your donors, with your supporters, with the people around you much more easily, much more effectively, and honestly, most importantly, much more conveniently for them than you might otherwise be able to do. Thank you. And then